I used to think that showing love, attention, and satisfaction would make a woman realize how lucky she is to have you. I don't think that anymore. I now believe that these things just make her take you for granted. They make her think that there is nothing she can't do, and you won't notice or make excuses for her. Sabrina and I met in our first year at university. We started dating, and by the end of freshman year we were in an intermittent relationship. We both seemed to really like each other, and we enjoyed the sex we were having, but neither of us were at the point where we wanted to get into a permanent relationship. Halfway through senior year we met again, and this time we stayed together. 6 months later we got married. Soon after, my parents celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, and during the party I caught my dad alone and asked him how he and my mom had managed to stay happy with each other for so long. I pointed to a few couples we knew who seemed like they couldn't go a week without fighting about something. How do you and mom manage not to be like everyone else? The secret is to tell them every day that you love them, and show them every day that you love them. Never let yourself get to the point where you take for granted that they know it. Always show it. Show your love every day of your marriage. That's what I did. I took my dad's advice to heart and made sure Sabrina knew I loved her every day for the next few years. I never forgot a birthday, anniversary, or other special occasion. I even made a list of random anniversaries to justify sending cards, flowers, and other gifts. I sent Sabrina flowers on the anniversary of the first time she made meatloaf, and the first time she used our new washer. I also gave her a card on the anniversary of her first promotion at work. No event was too big or too small that I couldn't write it down and use it. She received flowers and candy on the anniversary of the first time we made love. I sent flowers to her office for no reason, just so that in the middle of the workday she would get a card saying I love you. I did everything I could think of to show her how much she meant to me. I followed my dad's advice, but my dad used his relationship with my mom as an example. He didn't take into account that different women see things differently. My mom saw it as a sign of my father's constant love for her. Sabrina saw it as a sign of my insecurity and that I was doing it to beg for her attention. In her eyes, my desire to show her my love made me seem insecure. I didn't know this at the time, but I moved on with my life, happy in the knowledge that I had a happy Sabrina and I were doing really well in our careers. We were both moving up in the company and working long hours, with lots of late nights and occasional business trips. Sometimes we didn't even see each other for days. I was working late and Sabrina was asleep when I got home, or vice versa. I just accepted it as part of being successful, and I assumed Sabrina did too. When we were together, I did my best to. I tried to make up for the time we spent apart. The love was amazing. There were weekends when we didn't even get dressed. Sabrina would smile and tell me she was mine forever. I certainly believed it. I found out about it at her company's Christmas party, which was held at a hotel downtown. Her company had rented a ballroom and several rooms to use as guest rooms. The party was being held on Wednesday night. I told Sabrina that I would meet her there. The party started at 7. I had to put a client from out of town on an 8 flight, so I told Sabrina I wouldn't be able to make it until 8:30. The client decided to stay another day in sight to see, so I arrived at the party at 7:30. I arrived at the ballroom just in time to see Sabrina with a man I didn't recognize. I didn't know most of the people she worked with since I'd only seen them at picnics and Christmas parties. What struck me as odd was that Sabrina had her arm around his waist. I headed towards the hallway they had entered, and upon entering it I found that it was some sort of lobby with, I noticed, 3 rooms branching off from it. I wondered which room they had entered, so I tried the one nearest to me and found it empty, as did the room next to it. I was just about to close the door and go to the 3rd room when I heard a giggle. It seemed to be coming from the room, even though it looked empty. I went back inside to take a better look around. I heard another giggle. I realized it was coming from a vent in the ceiling. That's when I realized I could hear what was going on in the next room. I went to the door to go to the next room when I heard Sabrina say, "Careful, you don't want to rip your dress, do you?" Well, how the hell am I supposed to get to you here? Let me show you. Rena, I never get tired of looking at these. There was the sound of a zipper being zipped up, and then Sabrina said, "Damn it." I heard the sound of a zipper being zipped up, and then Sabrina said, "I'll never get tired of that. Are you sure we don't have time to run into one of the rooms for some quick sex? I need you. Come on. You made love at lunch, and you did it for 3 hours on a Monday night. You can wait until tomorrow." "No, I can't. You're going to have to. Bob said he'd be here around 8. I have to be here when he arrives. If he gets here early and I walk in with a just-made love look on my face, he might get suspicious and start checking up on me, and we don't want that. Come on, Rena. If he's as weak as you say he is, we can make love in front of him and it won't matter." "I know, love. I could just tell him to go home and we'll talk about it when I get there, and then I could convince him that we were just joking around and trying to play a joke on him, and he'd believe me. But just because I know I can doesn't mean I want to open that particular can of worms. Are you sure we can't make a quick run upstairs? I don't want to take any chances, love, but I can take the edge off for you. Tell him you were with me, and he'll have to wait until tomorrow. Maybe he won't. I thought you said we couldn't tonight. I said we couldn't go up to the guest suite. I didn't say anything about not being able to. How can you do that? Mark probably won't be here until after your husband. God, Rena, you're a depraved woman. I know, lover. That's why you like me. Come on, lover. We have to get back to the party was a real eye-opener. I went from feeling totally in love to absolutely hateful in the space of a few seconds. I was torn between two options. Should I kick down the door and then kick ass, or should I sit back and use what I'd just learned to make plans? Should I strike while the iron's hot, or should I wait and find out names, dates, and places? If I pounced on them now, it would be a he said, she said situation in divorce court. I could say I overheard, and she could deny it. I needed more information. In the divorce proceedings, I could say I overheard, and she could deny it. I needed more information. If I kicked down the door, I might never find out who Mark was, or even if there were other men besides Mark and the guy in the next room with Sabrina. No, I'd still get into trouble eventually, but it wouldn't be that night. I left the building quickly. I got in my car before it was time to tell Sabrina to wait for me. When I got to the ballroom, I saw Sabrina sitting at a table with two couples and one man. Sabrina is about 173 centimeters tall, and the guy she was sitting next to was about 183 centimeters tall. He had black wavy hair and a pencil-thin mustache. I could tell he was a bit of a smarmy character even before I got to the table. Sabrina saw me approach, stood up, and moved away from the table. She opened her arms to embrace me and moved to kiss me on the lips. But at the last second, I turned my head and accepted the kiss on my cheek. I could see the surprise on her face. I think I'm coming down with something. She agreed not to pass it on to me and then introduced me to the people at the table. His name was Ron. When he stood up to shake my hand, I could see that I was close to my guests. My height is 183 centimeters, and we were roughly at each other's eye level, which was only important because I wanted to know his reach. When I went after him, we sat down and I started chatting with my wife's colleague. I could tell that the two couples were a little restless, like they were expecting something to happen. I danced 2 numbers with Sabrina, and during the second, she whispered in my ear, "That thing that made you sick won't stop you from jumping on my bones tonight, will it?" Yeah, I bet it would, I thought, but I wanted to say no. "Rena, I don't think so," I replied, but I didn't. I wanted to wait and see how things went. I never called her Rhea like Ron had. I wasn't ready to do anything to alarm her, so I said, "Hey, we'll just have to wait and see how things go and how I feel when we get home." Sabrina didn't know it yet, but she would never make love to me again. When the music stopped and we went back to the table, there was another man sitting there talking to Ron and Sabrina. He was about 5 feet 8 inches tall and maybe 82 lb. He had soft hands and a weak chin. I memorized that information after about 10 minutes. Mark got up to visit with people at another table, and I followed him with the edge of my eye. I wasn't surprised to see him enter the hallway that led to the room where Sabrina was with Ron. Apparently, Ron had. I helped him out while Sabrina and I were on the dance floor. After a couple of minutes, Sabrina got up, gave me a kiss on the cheek, and told me she was going to the bathroom. Ron let her move a couple of feet away from the table, and then asked me what I thought about the Broncos' Super Bowl chances. It seemed like Sabrina had told him that I was an avid soccer fan, and that he would use that to keep me occupied while she was away. Sabrina left to talk to Mark about soccer. I watched her leave through the door and saw her return less than a minute later. It was almost 15 minutes before she returned to the table. I carried on talking to Ron and pretended I hadn't noticed how long she'd been gone. I wondered if Ron had realized what had happened. Sabrina had made love to Mark, and he'd got a little more than Ron. I don't know if anyone else at the table noticed, but after 10 years of marriage, I could recognize the signs. I don't think Sabrina even realized I knew her that well. After she returned to the table, I danced with her again and she pressed herself against me. "Please, please don't let me down tonight. It wasn't that important. I would get you out of here right now if we got back to the table." Mark asked Sabrina to dance, and as they stepped onto the floor, I saw a smirk on the face of one of the women at the table as she looked in my direction. I remembered that old cliché, "The husband is the last to know." Mark handed her back to Ron, who led her out, and I saw the two women at the table smile. I filed it away in my mind. If it was common knowledge among her colleagues, It wouldn't be hard to figure out what I needed. Sabrina danced with a few of her direct reports and then sat at her boss's table for 15 minutes talking to him. When she returned to our table, she whispered, "Okay, lover. I was seen and I danced with the people I was. I was supposed to dance with her, so let's go home. I'll be ready for you there. I really need this." We were in different cars, so I gave her a good head start. I wanted her to be home undressed and on the bed when I arrived. That way, she could experience the full effect of what I had planned. I drove slowly to make sure she had time to get ready. When I got home, I rushed upstairs and through the master I went to the bathroom and made my bowels move. I stayed on the toilet for a few minutes, making the right noises, and then I went to the sink, flushed the water, and wiped my forehead with a wet rag. I wiped my face with a towel and went into the bedroom. I saw Sabrina lying naked on the bed. "I'm sorry, baby. I don't know what it is, but I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to sleep in the spare bedroom tonight and I'll call the doctor in the morning." I could see she was annoyed when I left the room. I got up before Sabrina and was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee, trying to look unwell. When she walked into the kitchen, she asked if I'd slept much. I said I hadn't. She looked at the clock and saw that the doctor's office doesn't open until 8:30. I'd better give work a heads up that I won't be in today. I reached for the phone while she poured herself a cup of coffee and then went to get ready for work. "Don't forget I'll be late tonight. We're still working on that budget proposal, which should be ready by next Tuesday." "Yeah, you beta," I thought as I hung up the phone without ever making the call after Sabrina left for work. I got dressed and went to my office. I also took care of the remaining work and told the receptionist that I had a doctor's appointment and wouldn't be in for the rest of the day. I left the office and went to the public library. I looked through the reference books and quickly found the addresses and phone numbers for Ronald Bragg and Mark Travail. Then, using the library's computers, I found information on the company Sabrina worked for. I found the names, addresses, and other details. I also got the phone numbers of all the officers and board members. I looked at the biographies of the top officials and the chairman of the board to see how they'd react to the scandal. I was pretty sure that even the slightest hint of scandal would cause Sabrina and her two friends to trash everything that night. I parked near where Sabrina worked and waited for her to come out at 10:05. I followed her as she drove across town. She pulled into the motel parking lot, got out of the car and walked up to room 131. She knocked on the door, opened it, and Mark stepped aside and let her in. 20 minutes later, Ron pulled up, got out of the car and walked to room 131. I figured he was also there to attend the budget meeting. I wondered if Sabrina's company appreciated the fact that their employees were working on the budget, on their own time and at their own expense. I could be wrong. Some of them may have turned in an expense report at the meeting. Yes, that's right, I wrote down the make, model, and license plate number of Ron's car and drove home on the way, pondering what else I had learned about Ron. Both were married, but I had no way of knowing if they were happily married or not. All I could focus on was that neither of them were at the... I needed to find out more about them and maybe get them involved in my plan to disrupt the event. I also thought about a few things I hadn't paid attention to before, like Sabrina always working late on Mondays and Thursdays. I never doubted her when she told me that Mondays dragged on because they had to deal with all the problems from the weekend. On Thursday, she worked late because that day they had to get all the reports done and in on Friday. Why did I trust her? I was a bit naive when it came to her. I only now realized how naive I was. I was lying in bed reading when I heard her come home. I turned off the light, put the book down, and pretended to be asleep. Opened the door, peeked in, then closed the door and went into her bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. I had a hard time getting to sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to think of a way I could destroy the three of them at once and ruin them. It had to be all three of them at once because I didn't want any of them to see that something had happened to the others and take steps to protect themselves after it was done. I would let them know who did it, and knowing that they would know why, that's when it hit me. I sat down, downturned. I switched on the light and picked up the book I was reading. It was a murder mystery about a man who had been framed. He'd been convicted on planted evidence, and a lawyer and a private investigator were frantically trying to prove his innocence before he was executed. That would be enough, I thought, putting the book aside and turning off the light. Now that I knew what I was going to do, I fell asleep and slept like a baby on Friday morning. I told Sabrina that the doctor said I had the intestinal flu, and that with medication, it should go away in a couple of days. I'm still a little weak, but he says I should be strong enough to go to work on Monday. He doesn't want me to do anything but rest this weekend. Sabrina touched my cheek and gave me a hug. She said she loved me and that I'd need to rest up. I've been deprived and will need to make up for it. Then she left for work. After getting dressed, I left the house to do some more research. By the end of the day, I had learned that Ron's wife works as a legal secretary and that she wasn't at the party because she was out of town visiting her sick mother. Mark's wife sells real estate, and she missed the party because she was trying to close a deal on a $2 million property. Both marriages seemed stable, but I guess that was because neither woman knew what their husbands were up to. I would fix that. After spending a relaxing weekend at home, I told Sabrina that I felt ready to go to work on Monday. I'm still a little weak, but I should be fine as long as I don't overwork myself. Monday night, I went to pick Sabrina up again at the same motel. It was room 146, and Ron met her at the door and led her inside. 5 minutes later, Mark pulled up and entered the room. I wrote down Mark's car. I got some information and drove home since I was still asleep in the spare bedroom. I pretended to be asleep when Sabrina came home. I needed to find a new excuse to stay away from her. I couldn't use the flu as an excuse forever, and I needed at least another week to make a plan. I decided to keep it simple. We should use one of Sabrina's tricks against herself. Whenever we argued about something, or fought about something, Sabrina she'd just turn me off until she decided to make up with me. As much as she loved it, it never bothered her to disconnect me for a whole 6 months. Of course, now I knew why. She only turned me off, not her other lovers. When I got home from work on Tuesday, Sabrina was already waiting for me. "How are you feeling, baby?" "Pretty good. Want to have a little fun in the bedroom after dinner?" "I need a little more energy." I spent the whole day thinking about how I could annoy Sabrina enough to cut me off from love. I had an idea just before I left work. I was walking to the elevator, and one of the female employees in the records department was walking in front of me. She was wearing trousers, and I admired her ass and suddenly smiled. I knew what I was going to do. We finished dinner, and I helped clear the table. Then Sabrina did the dishes and I dried them and put them away, ready to make up for lost time. Love led the way. She stripped and shed her clothes as we headed for the bedroom. I wondered how she could be so hot for me when she clearly didn't care about me. She thought I was a wuss and told her boyfriend, so she treated me with contempt. Why was she trying so hard to get me to make love to her? Well, she wouldn't insist after I was done with her. She was naked when we got to the bedroom and immediately laid down on the bed. I was very rough with her in bed. When it was over, Sabrina jumped off the bed and yelled at me as she ran out of the room. Sabrina didn't speak to me for the rest of the week. I was really disappointed. My plan was not without some risk to me. If I was caught doing what I was supposed to, it would have been a disaster. If I didn't do it, I'd be destroyed. I was willing to take the risk because I wanted revenge. It was expensive, but if it brought me what I wanted, it'd be the best money I'd ever spent. I made phone calls to friends who had friends who knew people, who helped put me in touch with the right person. A midnight meeting in a parking lot brought me what I was supposed to get by the following day. On Sunday, I was ready. When Sabrina went to work on Monday morning, the decision was made that evening. I followed Sabrina to the motel again, and when she and her 2 lovers were in room 136, I got out of the car and went to Ron's car. The car was unlocked, so I opened the trunk and put a half pound of marijuana behind the spare tire. Mark's car was locked, so I had to use a Slim Jimmy I bought from a Snap. I went to a tool dealer to break into the car. I opened the trunk and put a pound of weed in there, then locked the car. I scattered an ounce of weed on the rear bumper to give the police a reason to search it. I drove half a block away, called the police from a payphone, and told them there was a drug buy going on in motel room 136. I gave them the license plate numbers of Sabrina, Ron, and Mark's car. They asked my name and I said, "No way, man. I'm not going to get set up by a bunch of..." I called another payphone and gave the police the same information I'd given the TV stations. There'd just been an election, and the new mayor had promised to crack down on drugs. I knew the cops would respond quickly, and the TV stations would be there to do a story. I drove another block to the third payphone and called Ron and Mark's wives. I told them their husbands were in room 136 at the Sea Breeze Motel with a woman. Then I drove back and parked off the road, so I could watch and make sure no one asked about me. It only took the police 10 minutes to arrive, but it took another half hour to get organized. A couple of patrol cars showed up first, then a SWAT van, followed by 2 unmarked cars full of plain-clothes detectives. By the time the cops were ready, the news reporters were already in place, and the TV vans had already arrived and were set up. I watched as 2 SWAT cops kicked down the motel room door. They used a battering ram and let 4 other SWAT cops go inside with their guns at the ready. I wish I could have been there to see Sabrina's face when the door collapsed 3 minutes later. Sabrina, Mark, and Ron were led out of the room in handcuffs. Mark and Ron were in their underwear, but Sabrina was naked under a blanket thrown over her shoulders. I pressed the preset button on my cell phone and called the president of Sabrina's company. When he answered, I said, "Did you know that 3 of your I told him that drug dealers were running drugs out of your office. I also told him what was going on at Sea Breeze." After making the same call to all 5 board members, I drove home. When the police searched Ron and Mark's cars, they found drugs that had been planted. They also found weed and an ounce of cocaine in Sabrina's purse under the front seat of her car. They would find another 4 ounces, but they didn't know what Ron and Mark's wives looked like. I don't know if they were in the gathered crowd or not, but I really hope they were there. This story was featured on the 10 o'clock news. I saw the news on channels 2 and 7. I laughed when the anchor on Channel 7 said that today, Mayor Jones began to fulfill his campaign promise. The police took down a major drug ring operating out of a city motel. I haven't heard how much was seized yet. There was footage of the 3 arrested drug lords, and we were urged to stay tuned for the latest news. I turned off the TV, unplugged my phone, and went to bed. I laughed when Sabrina asked me to mortgage the house so she could bail her out. She finally talked her parents into it. She put up the money, and when she got out of jail and came home, she found all the locks changed and all her stuff stacked in boxes in the driveway. "Why are you doing this to me?" I drove over to his house to have a word with him about his daughter Sabrina. I called him a couple of times a day, but I never spoke to him. When she turned up at my office one day, I got security to escort her out of the building. It just so happened that Mark and Ron had been laid off at their firm, and they didn't do too well when it came to their legal problems, even though they were first-time offenders because of the mayor's They didn't get probation like a lot of other first-time offenders. They made things worse for themselves by protesting their innocence even after they were caught with the evidence. Sabrina made things worse for herself when she demanded a blood test to prove there were no drugs in her system. The test showed she was clean, which meant the prosecutor could argue the drugs found in her purse and car were for sale, not for personal use. The mayor wanted to show immediate results of his war on drugs. The 3 were offered a deal, 1 year in jail, and 2, they had to do 0,000 hours of community service with good behavior, which would get them out in 9 months. Their lawyer told them they'd be in trouble if they didn't accept the deal, so they agreed to it while Sabrina was in jail. I filed for divorce, as did Ron's wife and Mark's wife. All 3 did their time, and when they got out, I kept an eye on them. When the time came, I went to see Mark. I found out later that he had 3 broken ribs and an arm when he got to the emergency room of the hospital. I suppose he could have pressed charges, but I wanted to take my chances in front of a jury. A man stomping on a man who was making love to his wife would have gotten sympathy from the men on the jury anyway. Either Mark had obviously decided that was the way it was going to be, or he felt guilty about what he had done and so left it at that. Ron and Sabrina lived together, and one evening I caught them leaving the bar after I finished with Ron and kicked him in the groin for the 6th time. I turned to Sabrina and said, "Not bad for a wimp, huh? Rena, remember the Christmas party where you were with Ron in that little back room? Remember how he said if he's as weak as you said he would be, we can have sex right in front of him and get away with it? Remember, Rena?" I saw her face change as everything fell into place, and I laughed. "That's right, Rena. That weakling has avenged your betrayal. Call an ambulance for your boyfriend. He doesn't look so good." She was still looking at me as I got in my car and drove away. That's the end of the story.